So welcome everyone. To introduce, I'm Apurva Sheikh. I'm the ED at Imarticus and I head the corporate business. Over the years, we have engaged actively not just with our clients, but with market leaders such as Ajay to understand the upcoming trends in skilling, especially in the fields of financial services, technology, and the new age skills. We have been hosting these short sessions with industry leaders to understand the fast changing scenario and the landscape. Today's topic for discussion is Skill Up to Scale Up, India in the next decade. There cannot be any better time than this to discuss the topic. Digitization, changing consumer behavior, and innovative ways of doing things have resulted in some technologies and the processes being obsolete in less than a year or two. Every crisis brings in opportunities to reinvent. Well into the pandemic, we now look at the times ahead. Would be interesting to know from Ajay what human qualities and what skills will last for next couple of years. Without wasting much time, let me introduce speakers for the webinar. Nikhil Barshikar. Nikhil is the co-founder of Imarticus Learning. Over the period of last 7 years, he has led the growth of Imarticus from one branch, one certification company to well over 15 branches now across India and Asia, with a portfolio of over a dozen industry-led programs, both online and offline space. Over the last 7 years, we have evolved as a strong B2B learning partner as well, delivering customized bespoke learning solutions, both again in online and offline space in the areas of finance, analytics, technology, and leadership. Nikhil began his career with Lehman Brothers in New York, following which he moved to set up the Lehman operations in India. And he successfully managed large teams and projects in Nomura. Ajay Srinivasan, again, he needs no introduction, but for sake of introduction, I'll introduce him. Ajay is the CEO of Aditya Birla Capital, the holding company of all financial services business of Aditya Birla Group. Ajay joined the Aditya Birla Group in 2007, and he has successfully led and transformed the organization into a universal financial solutions provider. Ajay's leadership has enabled ABCL to become one of the largest non-banking financial services players in India, with leadership position in several verticals. Ajay's experience in the financial service industry spans well over 3 decades, with 16 years as a CEO, and he has a track record of setting up, successfully scaling up multiple business entities, not just in India, but also abroad. Before joining ABCL, he was the chief executive at Prudential Corporation in Hong Kong, and before that with ITC Threadneedle Asset Management. A BA honors from St. Stephen's College and MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. Ajay is engaged in several bodies, including CII, and is an advisory board member of City of London. You can catch Ajay mixing some amazing numbers on a Saturday night on his console, or sweating it out on a game of cricket on a Sunday evening. I personally look up to Ajay a lot with admiration, and always learn a thing or two from our interactions. So over next 1 hour, we'll keep it interactive. Nikhil and Ajay will be asking each other a lot of questions, and we would love to hear more from Ajay. Ajay, thank you very much. This will be a 40 to 45 minute session. All the participants feel free to ask questions in the chat session. I will collate them and will be happy to ask last 10 to 15 minutes with Ajay. We will have a hard stop at 5 p.m. So over to you and Nikhil. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ajay. Thanks again for the time. I did not know that you were a DJ, which is very interesting for your current job as such.
Yeah, as you'll see from me, I like to keep options open, Nikhil. You never know with this upskilling thing that you guys are talking about. Somebody will come and take my job. I'll have to find something else to do. So you've got to keep your options open.
Sure. Ajay, let's start off. Tell us a little bit about, there's a lot, we obviously know your background from the public domain, but tell us a little bit about, how you ended up here, your career, some of the inflection points in terms of your careers, maybe the decisions you made that got you to this job and got you to this space.
Yeah, first, Nikhil, thanks for having me on this event. It's really it's my pleasure and privilege to be part of this. I can see there are almost 200 people online. So good evening to everyone. Starting to talk about myself, I think my view is that My career is a reflection of both chance and some planning. And I think that's the way I think most careers ultimately get made. You make some choices that kind of work out, and the other things that just kind of happen. So for me, I was, when I studied, I had a BA in economics. I wanted to actually be a PhD in economics. I wanted to go to the US, be an academician. I was very fond of economics, and that was always the path that I chose for myself. Purely by accident, I ended up taking the entrance exam for the IIM. I ended up getting through, and I ended up getting IIMA. And then it became very difficult for me at that point to push back and say, now that I've got this option, I wouldn't take it. So I can't say the choice of getting into management was a conscious choice. It was purely by accident. As I said, I was going somewhere else. By chance, I kind of ended up in management. But I think after that, most of my decisions were fairly well thought through and fairly conscious. So my first big decision that I think is an inflection point as well for me was the choice to join ICICI rather than to go to a foreign bank. You have the day one concept in management schools. At that time, day one was typically one or two consultants and the foreign banks. They paid you the best, they gave you the best job, they took you abroad, all the wonderful things that people look for when you pass out of MBAs. They were the day one jobs. So I went through that. In fact, I got jobs at a couple of foreign banks that I had to accept because that was the process. But I was very clear I didn't want that. So I then went and met ICICI outside of placement. I went and met Mr. Kamath, who'd come for the interview, and told him, I've got these jobs, I don't want it, I want to join ICICI. And I think that decision was the first inflection point for me because it gave me this ability to look at industry in a very different way. Because I think for people like me who never had work experience before they went into an MBA and you got thrown into a job straight away, you want something that gives you the ability to learn as much as you can. And you'll see that's a recurring theme with me. I think this ability to learn in your job and to learn at your job is something that I think allows you to develop very differently. So that one decision, I think, played a big role in my career subsequently. I think a second big inflection point for me was when I was with ITC in the mid-90s. I was in ITC helping them set up a number of financial services businesses. I have this background of setting up and scaling up businesses through my career. And I was doing that for ITC. I set up a whole host of businesses. And I was working with a finance director. And he said, there were three of us in his team. And he said, look, I'm setting up all these businesses. You guys choose which business you want to get into. And whatever you want to get into, you can go in and I will make sure you get a senior enough job in that. So obviously there was a big fight for investment banking. Somebody else wanted life insurance. I picked the poor mutual fund industry because nobody else wanted it. And I thought somehow, that had some potential. So there was no competition. He told me, fine. I went in as deputy chief executive at a fairly young age into that business because I was representing ITC, the shareholder. And I think that decision allowed me to become a CEO at a very young age. I became CEO at 33, 34. And that changed my career in many ways because of that one decision to say I will get into mutual funds rather than going where the rest of the herd was going. And I would say the third inflection point for me was coming back to India in 2007-8. I'd been in Hong Kong. I'd been there almost 7-8 years. And like, most people who go abroad never want to come back. You can't always blame them for that as well. I'm one of the few people who worked here, went abroad and decided to come back because I honestly feel that the opportunity in this country is phenomenal. And I think that allowed me to build this broad base of businesses, which I think when you work abroad, you get put into these silos. If you're mutual funds, you're mutual funds. If you're investment banking, you're investment banking. India, somehow I found a few people who were willing to experiment with me, including Mr. Birla. So that's how I ended up here and ended up building a broad base of businesses. So I think it's a combination of some conscious choices and a lot of luck. And I think you need both in a career.
Ajay, while you were describing it, right, it seemed like you made a few macro calls. One was Indian firm, then coming back to India, then even selecting businesses that, like you said, were maybe had a good long-term potential, but short-term didn't look so good.
Yeah.
In terms of how did you go about thinking about that? Was that something where you were following your gut? You had mentors, you had people that you were talking to. Give us a little bit about that.
So my ways, I talk to a lot of people. I like input into my thinking, but I like to take the decision myself. I don't think I should delegate my decision making, especially when it's about myself and my career, to somebody else. So I would take a lot of the decisions and kind of make the call myself. I think the last call of coming to India was also a call of working for a promoter-owned group, Nikhil. I must tell you about that, my way of thinking for me. Because in my career, I've worked with ICICI, which is, you would argue, a very widely held Indian company. I worked for ITC, which is a multinational, Indian multinational. I worked for Prudential, which is a global multinational. And then I decided that I'd seen those three types of organizations. One thing I felt was you never had this certainty of and consistency of strategic direction. Because every time you got a new CEO and crew, the guy would say, I'll go here, I'll go there, or somebody else would say, I'd go here, I'd go here. What I find with coming to a group like the Birla Group or any, where you have a promoter who takes a multi-generational view, is the ability to build long-term business. And I think that ability, to my mind, was a very important part of what I was looking for in my career. And so that was as much a part of my decision making as was coming back to India, which I thought was on the cusp of massive growth at that point in time.
Actually, that leads me nicely to my next sort of question. ABCL, right? And obviously, there's a lot of story around in terms of how Mr. Birla and you sort of thought about this particular growth, came out of somewhere and created an entire new vertical of this, which has obviously now in hindsight it's been a spectacular success. But maybe you can talk a little bit about what the context and the background was in terms of thinking about this like that. Being part of a larger group has its pluses, I'm sure, but maybe it has a little bit of minuses too. I think, I wouldn't, you are still obviously a very integral part, but it's still a large group, etc.
Yeah.
Maybe what was the background and context in terms of when you started off the structure of ABCL and how you thought about it?
So when I came into AB, it was that time not even ABCL. There wasn't an entity. We had actually 2 or 3 diverse businesses. I think the businesses had good starts, but had kind of lost their way along the way. They were losing market share. We were not really making as much progress as I think Mr. Birla wanted. Mr. Birla's mindset typically is to get into businesses and build scale to be one of the leaders in the businesses he operates in. He does that in all his businesses, whether it's cement or aluminum or carbon black or viscose. We tend to be global leaders in what we do. He had the same vision for financial services as well, that we build something that's really a leadership position in India, and we were clearly not in that. So the mandate to me was very simple. Help me build something that's really of significance and size in financial services, and we have this platform. Take this platform and do what you want to do with it. So that was the mandate I had. It wasn't a much more involved mandate than that, and I then went on to basically decide what I wanted to do. My first 100 days that I spent, because when you enter a new business and a new setup that already exists, there are lots of these equations and things that you need to kind of figure out, who's where. So the first thing I wanted to do was first build I have this vision in my head of a business being like a bus journey. You need to figure out first where the bus is going, and then you need to make sure you put the right people on the bus. And that's the way I think about the business in a very simple way. So the first 100 days was figuring out both these things. Where do we want to take this business? And how do I then tell everybody who's relevant to the bus where this bus is going? So this includes the person who's putting the fuel in the bus, the shareholder. It includes the people who are concerned about where the bus is going. And it includes all the people who sit on that bus, which were the employees. So first doing that, and then making sure I did a complete analysis of all the people to make sure I had the right people in the right seat on the right bus, was the second thing I did. I did that all in the first 100 days to be clear what I wanted to do. And after that, it was just making sure we executed.
And I'm going to ask you this question multiple times during this particular webinar, but as it pertains to this context in setting up business, were there a particular type of people that you were looking for, and were there particular type of people you would not not hire for?
Yeah.
Given that you were coming from, if I may, a legacy business or sort of large group business trying to become sort of a more professional financial services.
So I'll tell you very simply, because I can answer these questions in different levels of detail, we can go into that if you want. But very simply, I was looking for people who had this self-starting ability. And very simply, if I asked them a question saying, if I give you a white sheet of paper and asked you to draw your own dream and say that I'll be able to help you achieve that dream if we work together, would you be able to draw something for me? And the people who were able to do that well for me immediately kind of resonated with me, because that's the kind of person I was looking for. I wanted an entrepreneurial mindset, somebody who knew what they were going to build, not come and tell me, aap batao, and then I'll kind of go and get something done. So somebody who was entrepreneurial, who had this self-starting, self-motivating mindset. That, to my mind, has always been a very key characteristic that I've looked for in people. And it was very important at that startup point, because you need very different energy when you're starting up something. You need that torque to be able to build up in that engine, for which you need disproportionate kind of energy to be put. And therefore, you need people who have that constant energy and who have a dream which is big, and who are not driven, therefore, by a job or money or any such thing like that, which are, to my mind, all side effects and consequences, but really passionate about a dream that they want to build.
And Ajay, years hence, when you look at your first napkin business plan versus where ABCL is today, how different or how similar is it, etc.? I'll tell you mine. I'm going to laugh myself. My first business plan for Imarticus today, where we are, it's a different ballgame. So was it the same for you, or you had it all?
I can't claim I had everything done, but I think the broad blueprint, and the blueprint was really directional as to what were we trying to do? What were the key elements of that piece? What were the guide rails that we would kind of stay within? I think we have broadly stayed within those. We've had crisis galore, of course, in the last 12 years. I mean, I've never seen as many crises year after year coming as I've seen in the last 12 years. So that kind of sometimes derails some of these plans. But I think directionally, we are pretty much on track.
So I think before we get into the scaling part, I'll ask you one more ABCL question. You've been fundraising clearly over the last year or so, etc., versus some of the others haven't been. Maybe tell us a little bit future where ABCL is growing. You've obviously raised a lot of funds, etc., and then we'll sort of jump into the skilling part once we've had you.
So I think India is a massive opportunity in financial services. I think if you look across the board, it is just so underpenetrated. We have if you look at the top banks in the world, we will be number 50 or 55 in terms of our largest bank, which is State Bank. Even Singapore, Finland, Sweden, all of these have larger banks than we have in India. Overall, India is underbanked. Therefore, there isn't enough consumer credit available. India is underprotected. I'll give you very simple stats. Only 12% of deaths in India actually end up in a life insurance payout. That is bizarre. I mean, I know that the cost of life in India is cheap, but even the amount of cover that we provide on an average basis for life cover is far too low. 70% of health costs today are still borne out of pocket rather than through insurance. All this just means that you're going to have many years of growth in this sector. So I think we want to just position ourselves in a way that we are able to not only capitalize on the tailwinds that come, but also have some differential through our platform. So we gain slightly more than what the tailwinds themselves provide us.
Sure. So a little bit on, this idea of digital mindset, digital transformation. These are super buzzwords in the industry, in the training industry, etc. You can tell us a little bit about what it means to you, what it means to your business. How are you building these transformation mindsets across your company, across ABCL, etc.? What are you doing well? What are you struggling with? I read an article in COVID. You've reached about 4 million transactions on acquisition, this type of acquisition platforms. Yeah. But maybe a little bit more on in terms of how you think about this digital mindset, because it's more than a buzzword to serious players.
Yeah. So this whole thing about digital mindset, innovation, all of these to me ultimately in a business context mean nothing unless it changes the life of some stakeholder. So therefore, for me, the first thing you have to think about is whose life is this really going to impact and how significant is it for that person. Otherwise, I think you end up a lot of time spending on digital innovation, all of this stuff, which actually makes no difference to the end outcome. So the first principle is really make sure who it's going to impact and that it has substantial impact before you start that. So we did a couple of things that I can talk about from a digital perspective. What we did about 2 or 3 years ago, we actually mapped all our customer and distributor journeys in great detail. See, one of the benefits I have being part of a larger group is we have an industrial mindset. So you get people who understand quality, who understand process excellence, who are able to therefore do things that your typical financial services firm may not do. So the ability to map every process that we had in a customer journey or a distributor journey, we mapped that. And then we said, now, how can I eliminate processes from this so that I can reduce the time? And how can I use new technology to make this a much better experience for our customers and our distributors? And we've done that significantly across the board. Therefore, today, if you look at it, bulk of our services are available online. Almost all our businesses are able to onboard customers online, do a purchase transaction online, and 95-96% of our services are available online for people. So, but the starting point for that was actually doing this exercise and saying, how do I then make a difference to that guy? Now, I could have said, I have a digital mindset. I want to set up an app. I want to set up a website. But to what end? And that by itself doesn't do anything unless the entire value chain is kind of impacted by that. The second thing that we did is we just don't look at the front end stuff because that's the glitzy stuff that everybody gets to see. But at the end of the day, when you open the bonnet, you want to see what's behind and how the process is run. So again, there we've got a bunch of black belts and people like that in our shop. We're constantly looking at processes and say, how do I automate processes? How do I robotize processes? We have about 250 RPOs in place today in our financial services business. Again, not a very common thing for financial services guys to do when we started it out. Because my view is you got to get the whole process working. You can't have something that looks great digitally in the front and at the back there's all manual processes that work. So you got to be able to automate the whole thing. So we don't want any process that's manual. We want everything automated. Of course, it saves some jobs, but more importantly, it allows us to scale up in a big way. And I think the outcome for us was really felt in Q1, Nikhil. If you look at it in Q1, when everything was shut down, our health insurance business grew by 70%. We did everything digitally. Our life insurance business grew by about 10% when the industry fell by about 25%. So again, everything done digitally. Our mutual fund guys did almost like 1.5 million transactions, all digitally. Our fund managers were working from home. And we had collection efficiency in our lending businesses, which were as good as pre-COVID days, the peak of our pre-COVID days we were. So I think some of this prep, ultimately you got to test it somewhere. And the test for us was really Q1.
And Ajay, again, the question on org and people, do you have like a separate org that drives these transformation innovations, or you are hiring people within the business who are themselves sort of doing this and imagining this and doing this piece?
Yeah, I think the latter, Nikhil. I'm not a big believer in anything doing separately. I don't think you should have an innovation center. I don't think you should have a transformation center. I think it has to be integrated with your business. That's the only way it becomes real and it actually gets done. So for me, it's all around cross-functional teams that sat together, did this mapping out in terms of what the customer distributor journeys are. They understand what's happening and they're the best people to get it done. They can get expertise from people. So you can get technical experts and you can get subject matter experts. But I think the domain expertise has to come from within.
And in terms of the skill map of the org,
Yeah.
and almost the type of people that when I graduated, for example, in Lehman, everybody was looking for Ivy League guys who'd join, who had quantitative finance type of experience. Now, if you look at Lehman and Goldman, they're all looking for technology guys. Nobody wants to hire core finance guys.
Yeah.
In terms of your current and future skill map, maybe, and we have a lot of people here on the webinar which are starting off their career also and who have spent a bit of time in financial services both.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about today and tomorrow, what this skill map for an organization like ABCL, which is very diverse, which is large, which is the businesses looks like.
So I'll talk a little bit about skilling, but I also want to talk about mindsets and attributes, Nikhil, because I think that's going to be very critical as we go forward. So I think from a skill perspective, my view is that tech has almost become an essential part for any function. And I call this what I call the plus tech leader, because I think you can't do anymore only finance. You have to do finance plus tech. You can't only do marketing. You got to do marketing plus tech, because so much of tech today comes into the way you market. You can't be just an HR professional. You got to be HR plus tech, because people want to engage, your employees want to engage with you. So I think this plus tech mindset is a very important thing. It doesn't mean you need to know how to code on Python or any such thing like that. But you should understand how technology can be leveraged to make your function and your work better. And I think that's going to be an essential part of the way we look at the workforce going forward. So I think anybody who's not got that tech mindset is well worth spending time building that tech mindset, because that will pervade, I think, any work that you do. And if I talk about mindsets and attributes, I think I want to talk about four in some way, because I see this as a recurring theme in the way I look at things and the way people are required. The first, I think, is the ability to deal with uncertainty, ambiguity, and change. I think we're already living in a world of such rapid change, but I think it's only going to accelerate. And technology will make that acceleration faster, but it will also make that acceleration more unpredictable. So when you live in a world where change is rapid, it's unpredictable, and there's so much of unambiguity and uncertainty, the mental ability to constantly adjust to that change and be able to live in that world and to be able to take the calls that are required to be able to take is very, very critical in this environment. So I think uncertainty, ambiguity, and change are the first things that I want to speak about. I think the second, and I think you referred to it in a while, was this whole concept of self-responsibility, self-motivation, and courage. Because I think in the world of tomorrow, you're not going to get somebody else coming and motivating you, somebody else coming and telling you how to deal with conflict. You've got to be able to deal with it on your own. So this ability, like I say, the marathoner mindset of being ready to run the 42 kilometers and putting whatever it takes to run the 42 kilometers requires you to have that responsibility, self-motivation, and courage. So that's the second bunch I want to talk about. The third, and I think this plays to your business obviously, is curiosity and learning. Because I think that that's going to be an essential part of whatever we do going forward. That we are just never going to be ready for what's coming because of the rapidity of change. And therefore, unless we have this curiosity and the ability to constantly relearn, unlearn, relearn, and learn again, it's not going to work. So the learning curve is not important. The unlearning curve becomes important. And I think that's the third mindset that I think is very critical about how you look at things going forward. And the fourth is the ability to deal with complexity. Because as a result of everything I've said, complexity is going to be of an order which is very different to anything that we've seen. And all of us have to take decisions. All of us in managerial roles, the only thing we really do get paid for is taking decisions. How do you take a decision? Unfortunately, nobody teaches you. I hope you have a course on that, because I know nobody teaches you how to take a decision. You kind of just learn it along the way in the way that you do it. And everybody has cognitive biases. Everybody has behavioral biases. So you end up with these huge biases that come in your decision making. And that just makes for bad decisions in many cases. But the ability to take these decisions on the run in speed with complex situations, I think will be a very, very different element in terms of how to deal forward. So maybe another skill is the ability to use man and machine, because you don't want everything to be done by AI and the machine. The ability for man and machine to collaborate and therefore to understand tech becomes a very important part of what we do.
I think this idea early on, right? The mindset early on used to be, look, I graduated, now I'm in a very good job, and now I'm going to grow out and I'm sort of going to spend time sort of. This idea of when we started Imarticus, 100% of our people were people who had just graduated, and today 50% are people who have just graduated and 50% who are people of 5 to 7 years of experience. So I completely buy your point about velocity of change and continuous learning, etc. Maybe you can tell us in ABCL, how have you done that? Like, how are people continuously learning? What kind of framework have you put in place, or encouragement have you put in place for your? You have a large staff. So how do you do that at your current company?
So I think 3 or 4 things that we do, because it's a very core part of my belief, and therefore I've had the chance to kind of put it into the organization. One is obviously the obvious thing on training and development, making sure that people have access to training, that they have a training calendar. Every year we tell people, what do you need to do? We have this very nice way of saying, if you want to build your own career, you can go onto an app and a website, and it will tell you what competencies are required for that job compared to what you're doing today. And therefore, if you want to get from where you are to where you're going, what are the competencies you need to build? Therefore, what training do you need to have? So the training has some purpose in terms of what it's doing. So training development is the most obvious thing. Obviously, that's one piece. The second, I think, is the way we reward people and what we reward for. So our reward things are for people who think differently, for people who have come out with something innovative, people who've done things outside their normal course of work. When you do things like that, then people have to push themselves to get things done. And by the way, the reward also is only learning. So whoever wins this gets a chance to go to IMA or go to Harvard to do a course, or whatever it is, so that the reward also is learning. It's not monetary. I think the third thing that we do is we enforce rotation, Nikhil. I think that's a very important part, especially in organizations like ours, where we have 22, 25,000 people. We want to make sure that people are constantly rotating, because otherwise I think you get stuck in the same way of thinking, and the whole organization gets stuck in a rut. So we have this rule that nobody can be in the job more than 5 years. The minute you hit 5 years, you have to rotate. Either you rotate in a same city, or you move cities and rotate into something else. That, I think, again pushes you to learn, because it pushes you out of your comfort zone. And the last is cross-functional projects. Because if I put you in a cross-functional project, by definition, you have to learn differently, because you're put into a different environment with different people. So I think we have to just keep pushing and making sure that that it gets done. The comfort zone tends to be the biggest problem. Everybody gets into this comfort zone, and that is the enemy of everything that is good.
Sure. I think you addressed a little bit of this, but when I graduated, for sure, everybody wanted to be an investment banker. Now, like I said, everybody wants to be in analytics, AI, and whatever the next buzzword is, etc. How does someone who's an experienced person who's spent a little bit of time in financial services, etc., think about his career? Like, what advice or what can we tell him to say that, look, you are still relevant, and your skills are needed, and they are not going to be replaced by the next guy who can code in Python.
Yeah. So like I said, I think you have to have a plus tech mindset. So I think that becomes the core. And my core belief is, a lot of people ask questions about whether jobs will get automated and stuff like that. My core belief is that man plus machine will be better than machine alone. And therefore, tech plus some functional understanding, some domain understanding will be better than just that domain understanding alone. And therefore, people who are able to work with machine and therefore find a way to be able to leverage the power of computing and the power of technology, I think will be much more flexible, much more progressive, and will have much more scope than people who find that they are unable to deal with that tech.
And Ajay, in your experience, do you find these people easily? Do you find people who have this tech sort of finance plus tech type of background? Is it a easy skill for you to find across levels?
It's not a skill that's been required so far, Nikhil. So I mean, if you ask me, it's not easily available. You really have to search. But I think, as I said, if you have curiosity, then you start pushing people to start learning that at least, right? It may not be inherent in them, but at least then they have the ability to learn and start gaining that skill. But no, it's not a very widely held skill, I would say, in most parts of India today, because it is relatively new for all of us.
Some anecdotal, a little bit maybe in humor also. Maybe tell us a little bit about the best job interview that you've had, or the worst job interview you've had, in terms of when you were interviewing, not as in when you were interviewing, but somebody was interviewing for a job with you.
Somebody interviewing with me, as in not my interview. I'm interviewing somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I've interviewed far too many people. So I end up, in the first 10 minutes kind of figuring out whether the fit will work or not. Because to me, I'm looking for the right words. I look for words and I look for attitude. I'm not looking for whether you're an MBA from X and your specialization is Y and Z. That the CV can tell you and that somebody else can figure. So I'm looking for the nuances. I guess the worst ones are where people are completely unprepared. And I've had people who come and you say, so, tell me, what do you know about ABC? And they'll say, you're in life insurance. And I say, okay, I mean, is that the most insightful comment you can make about ABC? And often that's all the person knows. And that then becomes a very short interview, because I expect if you're coming to build a career with us, you've done some analysis in terms of what is this company? Why does it work? What are the things there? And therefore the converse is, the people who have done the best are people who have actually invested some time understanding the organization and wondering why this organization is a good fit for me. Because most of my time, at least in interviews, is that it's finding out this entrepreneurial mindset, figuring out what gets this guy going. It's figuring out why does he want to join. I want those motivations to be right. If those motivations are right, I'm sure we can work with anybody.
Are you a person who makes up his mind quickly, or are you a bit of time?
Yeah, I think I'm reasonably clear very quickly, but I've also learned one thing through experience, that sometimes the decision not to do something is also a good decision. So sometimes I've now got to this stage where I realize maybe I don't have to take the decision now, or maybe not taking a decision is the right decision, so just let it be. Whereas earlier on in my career, I felt that pressure to just take decisions because that's what I thought my job was. And I think I'm reasonably good at that, so I was happy to taking them as well. But now I'm much more conscious about decisions I don't need to take, and decisions I will not take. So you come to me and say something, I'll say, it's not my job, it's your job, you take that decision, not my job. That was not something I used to do as much earlier.
True. In today's time, Ajay, we can't let you go without talking about COVID.
Of course.
Almost, we'll get bashed for it. So let's talk a little bit about it. First thing, did you call it right? Like when I heard of it, I said I'm going to be back in the office in 10 days. So, or did you call it right, saying maybe the severity of it, or the time it's going to take, etc., the impact it's going to have?
See, I'll tell you, I was in New York in February, Nikhil, and I was meeting investors, and we were hearing what was happening in China and what was happening in Italy at that time, because they were ahead of us in terms of what was happening. And the constant refrain there was just locking down. Everybody was in this mood of kuch problem ho, Wuhan had already locked down, Italy was already doing a lockdown, and India was remarkably unaware of anything that was going on. So in fact, I made a call from New York to our guys saying, you guys better ramp up all our BCP requirements, because I think the only way if it hits India that we can deal with it is a countrywide lockdown. So I don't know, I think I had the benefit of being in a different place to call that. That allowed us actually to move to work from home almost a week before the Prime Minister announced the national lockdown. And we were prepared for that. And I still don't know how long it's going to continue like this. So I can't say I called it whether it's a week or 10 days. I think we really don't know where this is going. It's the first time for all of us, and we all kind of have to find our way through this thing. I don't know. I mean, I'm hearing Google is talking about next summer. A lot of the firms in New York are talking about saying till December, don't even think about coming to work. So who knows?
Sure. And from how are you dealing with a sort of a COVID impacted workforce? Because, everybody has its challenges. Yeah. Working from home was interesting for the first 2 months. Now people want to shoot themselves at home. Yeah. How are you dealing with that? Is this the time to sort of rally the forces? How do you go about it?
So I think there are some things that don't change, and there are some things that change, Nikhil. And I think the some things that don't change, I think are two things. One, if somebody is not performing, then they should go. I think to my mind, COVID has shone a light much more clearly on people who don't perform, because when everybody's working from home, you can figure out who's contributing, who's not contributing. Sometimes in this office environment, you see a lot of activity, but you can't, that's the smoke behind the activity, and you really can't figure out who's done what. But now you can clearly identify who's worked and not. So I think it gives you that ability to identify people not performing. And I think that you have to take care of in any case, in any organization. I also think this is a great opportunity to build an employer brand, because I don't think everybody is dealing with employees as fairly and as openly as employees would like. And I think we wanted to stand apart and say that this is a great opportunity for us to deal with people differently. And we said day one that we're not going to therefore let go of people. We're not going to cut salaries. If everybody helps cut costs all around, then everybody's going to be happy as a result of that. So everybody then becomes on the same page, trying to fight the same battle. But some of the things that we've already done is we already have a roster now of people that we think will work from home. We think that might end up at about 20 to 30% of our workforce that will be permanently working from home. Some part will be flexible. They'll come to office sometimes, they'll work from home sometimes, and the rest will be back in office. So I think that gives us a good sense, therefore, of how work processes should work, how much real estate we'll actually need, and what kind of skills we have. Because, this work from home now, the skill market becomes completely different for us, right? I don't need to hire somebody in Bombay because he had to come to office or she had to come to office. I can hire somebody in Salem if they're a good data analyst. I could never bring them earlier, but now I can hire somebody in Salem and they're taking a job of somebody who used to be in Bombay earlier. The market is just completely changed in that sense.
Ajay, there's a lot of angst in the market, and rightly so, right? For people who are just entering the workforce, who have entered a workforce maybe in the worst sort of time we've seen in terms of unemployment, in terms of uncertainty. Businesses are open sometimes, open are closed sometimes. Give advice to these people in terms of how should they be thinking about it, and not only freshers, right? People are losing jobs. Experienced people are losing jobs. So the job market in the US is bad. The job market here is also getting worse and worse, etc. People are taking longer to. What is your advice for people like these?
So before I give advice, I'll share some history with these people, because I spent some time going back in history and looking at what happened after World War I, what happened after World War II, what happened after the Great Depression, and what happened after the great financial crisis of 2007, 2008. In each of these things, we saw that two things happened. First thing is that the economy collapsed during this. So the economy collapsed during World War I. It didn't collapse during World War II. Completely collapsed during the Great Depression and global financial crisis. Also, the market went through major problems. Nothing as bad as COVID so far, I think, but I think the Great Depression comes close. But what happened in the subsequent 5 years was the rapidity of growth and the speed of growth was unprecedented. And typically it grew like 3 to 5 times as much as it had decreased during this crisis. So what I would say, therefore, is whenever this is over, whether it's December, March, next year, September, I think we will see a period of very, very rapid growth. And I think people who are thinking about it today also have to think about how they'll position themselves for that rapidity of growth. And the second thing that happened in all of these crises is that you always had phenomenal innovation that followed. I mean, after World War II, we had the first computer, we had the first jet engine, we invented penicillin, all kinds of things that never existed before came after World War II. Fintechs came after the global financial crisis. You never had fintechs in such a big way other than the financial crisis. So you will see innovation and growth of a different order when this crisis is over. When you're in a fog and you're in a crisis, it looks terrible. My point to everybody is I've been through too many of these myself. All you need to do is just stay positive, stay the course, skill yourself, keep adding value, and just don't feel like a victim, because there are not 1 or 2 people, there are billions of people in the same boat as everybody today. So I think the more we realize that we're in this together and you just need to keep going at it, just prepare yourself for that upturn. I think that will keep you going, it'll keep you motivated, and it'll give you something to work towards.
Ajay, perfect. And I don't have any other questions. Thank you for the chat. I think there are lots of people who want to ask you questions. Let's give them a chance.
Yeah. So Ajay, I'll try to compile these questions for you. And meanwhile, to all the participants, please post your questions on the chat box and we will be happy to take them. So Ajay, a lot of questions regarding job and post-COVID. What will be the future of investment banking, financial services after COVID in next 1 year?
So I don't think these things change that much. I think I don't think the function changes, the job changes. Sometimes the way things happen will change. And I think, to my mind, digitalization is going to be something that will be across the board. So people who make money in doing something that can be digitalized or can be changed because of digital, I think they need to think about themselves in a very different way. But I think if you can use digital as something that allows you to build, then whether you're in investment banking or mutual funds or lending, that's not going to change. I think people are always going to need money. People are always going to want to do deals. People are always going to want to buy insurance. That's not going to change. How they do it might change and will change.
Prerna has a question. I think this is from a lot of MBAs or recently passed out MBAs. I'm pursuing MBA now and I'm in the second year. What qualities you expect from MBA in finance?
So I think not very different to the qualities I spoke about earlier. I think you need humility. I think it's very important to be humble in whatever you do, because we honestly don't know the kind of things that are happening around us. And people who graduate thinking that they're MBAs and they know things because they've got an MBA are going to find it very difficult because the world is changing too rapidly. So I would say be humble about the kind of changes that are happening. Be always a curious learner. Always upskill yourself. Think about value. I think you should think about yourself as what value you bring to a job or what value you bring to a company, because that's the only thing that's going to last. A job or a role may get automated. It may get replaced by a computer. But if you're constantly adding value, it'll be very difficult for somebody to take you out. So always do things that look like to you that are adding value to yourself and to the work you're doing.
Again, something similar, scope of MBA grads who are undergoing or will pass out in the pandemic. One question again, within financial services, what is it for CFA, FRM, more freshers? Within financial services, what is it that they should look out for? What will work for them, what won't?
So, I mean, that's a general question. It's difficult to answer without knowing the specifics. But I think, anything that plays to the mass retail base of India, to my mind, has lots of legs, because when you do specific roles like private equity, investment banking, I think the universe is much smaller. But I think when you play to something that's playing to 1.4 billion people and something that has the ability to be much more retail, I just think you've got many more options, many more things that allow you to build your career if you do something like that. So I know it's less exciting and less sexy than doing something that sounds like investment banking and PE. But if I was starting out my career, honestly, I would do the same thing. I wouldn't go down that path. You can always get back to that if you want to. But work on something that is really unique and different, which is the ability to tap this massive customer opportunity in India.
Sure. This is from someone, what the youngsters can do at the present to balance their life and financial status. Can you give some solution for unemployability? I think this is more from somebody losing a job and how to manage their life.
Yeah, I mean, again, difficult to give general advice. All I would say is, you just have to keep your chin up, stay positive, and believe that this thing will pass. And I think this thing will pass, and you will see phenomenal growth after that. I'm convinced about that. So whenever you go through a crisis, my view is you got to see through the crisis, because in the crisis, the fog looks the worst, the rain looks the worst, and it looks like the whole world is coming to an end. But the minute you go through it, suddenly you realize that it's actually very sunny and very nice, and the world on the other side is beautiful. So just have patience and just work through this.
Career and work. Somebody has asked your view on what are your thoughts on fintech players? How do you look at MasterCard acquiring FinCity? Any views on that?
So I think, let me answer the first question, and second one, I'm not sure how relevant it is for us here, but on the fintech, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to collaborate with fintechs as large players ourselves, because I think fintechs work very well on solving problems in a great way. But I think they lack sometimes, what they lack is scale and the ability to, for instance, have a 21 million customer base, which is what we have. So fintechs, we won't have that kind of base. So I think we have to rewire our minds to start thinking about collaboration rather than competition, because fintechs collaborating with large players make for everybody being in a much better place. So we ran a large experiment last year where we called in about 600 to I think almost 1,000 fintechs from around the world to solve specific problems that we had. And we then identified 17 of those from that 1,000. And we're now doing pilots with each of these 17. And I think that will be the way forward for us, for instance, as an organization. That's the way we will go forward. It allows us to pick the best ideas, the best fintechs for our thing, and gives them access to big scale. And I think that model, to my mind, is a better model for both the fintech and for us than trying to compete in a space together.
I think this is a little relevant question, that 60% of students are from tier 3 colleges and they have potential, but their recruitment chances are low. Why so? And how can they skill up to get better recruited?
I'm not sure that's necessarily true, because I know, for instance, we definitely like to go across the group. I'm not just talking about Aditya Birla Capital, but the Aditya Birla Group itself goes into many tier 2, tier 3 cities to look for people, because we do think that the kind of people you get from there, add a lot of value to the workforce. And therefore, a lot of the people we recruit come from these colleges and places. So I don't think you need to do anything more than anybody else. I think you just have to make sure you're seen and heard. Because I think these kind of people bring a very different perspective to the workforce and are valued for that.
Nikhil, I think there are a couple of questions more on the future of data analysts. So I'll just frame them. Somebody has asked, what will be the data analyst growth after this pandemic? Somebody has asked, can this current pandemic will affect on job opportunities in data science field? What are your views on this? Also, what are the important things you suggest one should do extra from our side? And third, relevant in the same line, is business analyst or data analytics with MBA finance, which will prevail in long run? Even a commerce guy should go in for analytics.
Look, like Ajay, I believe this is merely a sort of a speed breaker. So the long-term potential of financial careers and data in India, obviously in data analysis, supports a lot of the US and UK sort of global outsourcing also happens in India. So I don't think the value that we add in this value chain has diminished. So will placements slow down? Yes, but I think the idea is that the sooner we go back to work, the sooner everything goes back to normal. I think you'll start to see that growth rate, like Ajay mentioned. As it pertains to in terms of what skill along with finance, I think again Ajay talked about MBA plus tech. You can define that tech in various ways: analytics, cybersecurity, and there are various subfields that you can talk to. That goes back to the interest that you have and what resonates with you as a person. But I think the overall space is strong. I think it's got good growth numbers. I think if you look at it, India last year had about 1.5 lakhs of analytics 2 years ago. Now we're talking about close to 4 to 5 lakh type of analytics jobs. So I think the growth rate in analytics is constant. Obviously, there are challenges right now in the system, but I see them as short-term challenges.
We'll take last 2 or 3 questions. This one's for you, Ajay. ABC being one of the core NBFCs, how would NBFC as a sector would change its approach at times when repo is so low? So how would they continue racking up their business as before in housing finance or other businesses when central banks provide money at such cheap rates?
So I think that question actually is really, if the question is really how do you compete with banks, because that's what I'm looking at the question as being, that because money is so cheap, banks have money that is cheap and therefore they have the ability to compete. I think it goes back to the point I made earlier that India is just so underbanked that today if India actually grew at 5-6%, which is what we want, we don't have enough money in this country to be able to fund that growth. There just isn't enough credit availability to be able to fund that growth with everything that we have today. And over the last few years, we've seen, banks going through trouble. A couple of banks have gone under, a couple of banks have got merged. We've seen a number of NBFCs and housing finance companies have problems. So we just don't have enough supply of credit in this country. So I'm not really worried about it from that perspective. I think if India grows, there's going to be more than enough appetite and more than enough demand for anybody who's able to provide credit to these people.
I'll take one last question and then maybe some closing remarks from you, Ajay. Someone's asking, due to automation, many people are losing their jobs and being unemployed. What do you think of UBI, Universal Basic Income? Is that a solution?
Yeah, I think at some stage, my view is that will become a reality in many parts of the world, because I think as automation picks up, you'll find many jobs that today people do at different levels will get automated and people will find it difficult to get other jobs and other careers. So I think a universal basic income, I'm not sure how long it will take to become more prevalent. But I'm sure in the next 5 to 10 years, it will be something that will be there in many economies. And people say that, when that happens, you'll get the second cultural revolution, because people will have time on their hands. They'll have, nothing else to do because the government is paying them to stay at home because there aren't enough jobs. That's when people will become artists and singers and all the other things that come about, which came about in the earlier cultural revolution, will come again. So, there's always a positive thing to everything that happens.
So we had quite a few questions. We had quite a few questions regarding what courses to take, what trainings to apply for, which were very, very specific to what Imarticus does, and I didn't want to bring them up here. So everyone, please write to us, info@imarticus.com, and we will be definitely taking up your questions. Meanwhile, Ajay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you as always. Nikhil, once again, thank you. Any last closing words, Ajay and Nikhil?
No, thank you, Ajay, for the time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
No, thank you. And maybe the only thing I'd say at the end is to people, I've often seen through my career now, I've been a CEO for a bulk of my career, 2/3 of my career, and therefore I get to meet people in different places. It's a phenomenal opportunity and privilege that I get from this job. I find that most people don't achieve what they want to achieve in their life because they've never thought differently about the way they think about things. And I often believe that we only do the things that we're able to think about. If you think that something is a limitation for you, then that becomes your limitation. If you don't think of that thing as a limitation, that is not a limitation. That's the way the human mind works. And the people who are most successful in anything that they do are people who have this ability to not put artificial constraints on their own ability and their own dreams and their own aspirations. So a number of the questions that I'm reading and thinking about, I think people are putting too many restrictions on their own thinking, their own ability, and their own capability. We're all capable of immense amount of things as long as we have the self-confidence and the ability to think about what is possible. So I would just urge everybody to free themselves mentally, to really be the best version of themselves, and to break the boundaries that actually shackle us and hold us back. Because if we can do that, all of us will not just live through COVID, we will strive and we will continue to thrive, in any future that we may see.
Well said.
Makes absolute sense. Thank you, Ajay. Thank
you,
everyone. Thank you, Nikhil.
Thanks, Ajay. Thanks, Apurva.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone.